understands. In relation to the security and safety of Jews in this country, of course we must step up. That needs to be done in a number of ways: practical support, financial support. Sad though it is to say that we need to put even more security in around our synagogues and schools, so children can go safely to their schools in this country. But we must do it, and we've already been working on that for some considerable time in government. I took the time the day after the Manchester attack to talk to the CST and other leaders about what more we can do in that regard, and I'm more than happy to work across the House on this. I think we owe it to our Jewish community here that we're seen to be working together on these important measures, and I thank her for her support.
Najsha.
I first of all associate myself with a comment from the Prime Minister regarding the attack, Bahini's attack in Manchester and on Peacehaven Mosque. An attack on any place of worship is an attack on our democracy and our way of life. I'd also like to thank the Prime Minister and his team and his ministers in particular, and our Director for National Security, for all their efforts and for the recognition of Palestine. This is something that has been, as the member stated earlier, long overdue and historically put in a right that we should have done a long time ago. And that has no doubt contributed to where we are today. So once again, a huge thank you. But can I ask the question, whilst we have, I recognise we have over 92% of the homes in Gaza have been erased, more than 730,000 displaced, of them 520,000 children in particular. Could the Prime Minister outline in detail what more is being done to rebuild Gaza in addition to aid, in addition to our conversations? Thank you.
Can I thank her for her question? And reconstruction is a really important task. It will be extremely difficult given the levels of devastation. We are working with others on a plan. We are hosting a conference later this week here in relation to that issue, and we'll continue to do so. But we need to do so at pace, working with our allies, and it is a huge task that we have ahead of us.
Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The ceasefire, the release of the living hostages and the flooding of aid into Gaza is a moment of hope for us all. The Prime Minister has responded to a number of questions on accountability, and he will know the importance of this moment for starting to gather evidence about what's taking place in Gaza, both the atrocities committed by Hamas and the actions of the IDF and the mercenaries working for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation under direction of the Israeli Cabinet. So can the Prime Minister spell out in a little bit more detail what support the UK Government is giving to those agencies that will gather the evidence that will allow for full accountability in future?
Well, I thank him for his question and his championing of these and raising of these important issues. It is important that as we move on from the agreement and rebuild, that there is accountability. And that is why it's important that the media and others are allowed access just as soon as possible, and those charged with holding others to account have what they need in order to do so.
Chris Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know I speak for my whole constituency when I welcome this long overdue ceasefire, and can I put on record my thanks to Prime Minister and Foreign Office Ministers for the many opportunities to put my constituents' views to them. As we turn to the ceasefire, thoughts turn to rebuilding, but that is not just physical. The children make up 50% of the population of Gaza. They are traumatised, and their educations and futures have been profoundly disrupted. Giving them a future is the best guarantor of future peace. So what can the British Government do to ensure the children of Gaza have a real future?
I thank him for raising this because children in Gaza haven't been to school for the best part of 2 years. It's had a huge impact, and we are already working at pace with others to see how quickly that can be one of the first issues in terms of the rebuilding, because it's so essential for those children and to ensure that they have a better future as we go forward.
Sir Julian Lewis.
The Prime Minister has said again today that there can be no place for Hamas in governing the Gaza Strip. But who can physically prevent Hamas retaining its weapons and regaining control as it did in 2006. And when he talks about anti-Semitism here in Britain, is there any other interpretation for the demand to internationalise the Intifada other than a call to attack Jewish communities around the world?
There's no other interpretation. I'm glad and pleased that he raised it and to give me the opportunity to agree with him on that important point. On the first point he makes about decommissioning, of course this is going to be difficult, but it's vital. It was difficult in Northern Ireland in relation to the IRA, but it was vital. And that is why we have said that we stand ready, based on our experience in Northern Ireland, to help with the decommissioning process. I'm not going to pretend that's easy, but it is extremely important.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I suspect one of the reasons why our optimism is cautious is that many of us are acutely aware that the damage that has been done will last a generation on all sides of this conflict, and for some the damage can never be repaired. I thought yesterday of my constituent Sharon Lifshitz, whose father Oded was brutally murdered by Hamas and spent his life driving ambulances across the border for Gazan children because he wanted that two-state solution. The Prime Minister spoke of the evacuations, and I'm very proud to have worked with Project Pure Hope, who were the first organisation to get children out of Gaza here to the United Kingdom for medical treatment. And now we have a scheme, but we know many more will continue to need assistance, and they will need the assistance that medical teams here in the United Kingdom can provide. So can you just update us on the commitment and how long that will be for that scheme, and how we can make that Oded's legacy in this House?
I can update. We are evacuated. We've got plans to continue to do so, and I'm happy to either myself or through other ministers update the House on what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Sammy Wilson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and first of all, can we welcome the release of the hostages and the prospect of long-term peace in that area of the Middle East. I know this is probably stick in the throat of many members opposite, but we must thank President Trump for the role which he played in delivering this deal. He recognised that weakness will never move terrorists, and only strength will do so, a lesson which unfortunately I think our government needs to learn, because Hamas were encouraged by the recognition of the Palestinian state which our government undertook. But that lesson needs to be applied at the next step. And the Prime Minister has rightly said that Hamas can have no role in the future of Gaza. What steps does he intend to take to ensure that, first of all, they don't have the guns which enable them to have control, that they relinquish that control, and they can never use Gaza again as a launching pad for their terrorist attacks?
He will know that I have thanked President Trump a number of times, and I'm absolutely clear that but for President Trump, this peace agreement would not have been reached. I've had the opportunity to say that to him publicly and also privately, because, as you know, we get along, and that is good for our relationship with the US and our ability to influence events. On decommissioning, this is such a serious issue, because it's very hard to see how there can be lasting peace unless Hamas is ridded of its weaponry and capability, and that's where I think the decommissioning work will be hugely important. It's part of the 20-point plan. It now needs to be turned into real actions, working with others, and I do think that the United Kingdom has got experience, sadly in some senses, but we do have experience of the challenges of decommissioning that we can bring to the table in relation to this.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement today and, of course, this peace deal? Can I also welcome his crystal clear statement that there can be no lasting peace and no viable Palestinian state in which Hamas is involved in any way? Similarly, there can be no lasting peace without the reconstruction that is now desperately needed. And I think the Prime Minister has said on a couple of occasions today that the public, I think, were going to be surprised when they see the extent of the devastation that's taking place. Right now, there are 400,000 tonnes of rubble that need to be removed before a single piece of reconstruction can take place. So can I ask the Prime Minister, will he reject the isolationist calls in some quarters and agree with me that this country will rightly play its full role in ensuring that reconstruction takes place?
Well, I can give him that assurance, and I genuinely think that across most of this House, that is the position that most members would want this government to play, and will support it.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the release of the hostages and what the Prime Minister has said about aid. But flooding Gaza with aid is not an end in itself. It's the distribution to those people who need it most. So what reassurances can he give the House that gangsters and criminal gangs will not play any part as intermediaries in the distribution of that aid?
Thank him for raising this. Firstly, let's be clear, aid is not flooding in today. It is beginning to go in today. It needs to flood in, but it's not flooding in yet, and so we do need to get it in. He's absolutely right that then the distribution becomes a critical next issue, and that's why we're working with others on what the security arrangements need to be in place as soon as possible in Gaza to ensure that aid gets to where it needs to get to. So volume, speed and effective distribution are absolutely key in relation to this, and we're working with others to ensure that we play our part in that.
Sana Begum.
September last year, the government announced that it has suspended 30 export arms licences to Israel, with around 350 licences remaining active. The government has repeatedly said it was blocking the sale of items to be used in Israel's military assault in Gaza, yet a new Channel 4 report has found Israel imported nearly £1 million worth of UK munitions in the first 9 months of this year, with a total of 110,000 items categorised as bullets from the UK to Israel in August alone. Could the Prime Minister confirm whether UK-made munitions were used in Israel's military assault in Gaza, and does he agree with me that a world for justice and with peace that is lasting must be one without these bullets and these bombs?
The government's position in relation to banning arms has been set out on many occasions, and it's not been altered.
Ellie Chams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the ceasefire and was deeply moved, as I'm sure we all were, by the scenes of Israeli and Palestinian families being reunited yesterday. One of the Palestinian prisoners who has not been released is Mr. Marwan Barghouti, a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council who's been in prison since 2002 without a fair trial and subjected to human rights abuses. Can I ask the Prime Minister what recent representation his government has made in the last few days to secure the immediate release of Mr. Barghouti, given his widespread popularity as a unifying voice for Palestinian rights, dignity and freedom, and therefore his potential crucial role in securing a meaningful and lasting peace in the region?
Can I thank you for raising the individual case, and offer to provide her with such further information as we can, as soon as we can, in relation to that particular case.
Yuan Yang.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I deeply welcome this long-awaited ceasefire and release of hostages, and I want to thank the Prime Minister and his ministers for their tireless work and international leadership on this front, including in the upcoming Gaza Recovery Summit to be held later this week in the UK. I'm glad to hear the Prime Minister's commitment to reconstruction and to aid. I note the UN Commission of Inquiry's recent report that described how the obstruction of aid into Gaza has led to what it calls the destruction of Palestinians. What is the current situation facing UN agencies' access to Gaza, and what more can we do to ensure that it flows freely?
Prime Minister.
Tom Fletcher is leading our work in relation to this, and we've been clear throughout that aid cannot get in on the scale and volume that's needed without the UN, and that's why we've always championed and said the UN should be part of that distribution.
Sir Julian Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is fitting that this statement is followed by one on Northern Ireland. The UK has world-leading experience on sustaining peace, whether it is security, intelligence or military, whether it is decommissioning, policing or political institutions. Could I urge the Prime Minister to do an audit of the generations of civil servants and, dare I say, special advisers who have experience in this area and put them on offer to sustain this peace deal?
Minister.
Can I thank him for that suggestion? Can I also acknowledge his role in Northern Ireland, where he was rightly held in high respect in Northern Ireland and across this House, and continues to be held in respect because of what he did and the way in which he went about it. and that should be a model for so many more of us in this House. And the idea of reaching into the expertise we have in government across different parties, across different governments, is one that I'll take up. So I thank you for that suggestion.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the Prime Minister's statement, and we all achingly welcome the longed-for ceasefire in Gaza and the safe return of prisoners and hostages. But does the Prime Minister share my concern that the 20-point plan is without Palestinian input? Will he acknowledge the need for Palestinian self-determination, their consent for any governance or stabilisation arrangements? Will he ensure the continued pursuit of war criminals? And will he work to achieve an end to Israel's illegal occupation of all Palestinian territories and the full engagement of a sovereign Palestinian state?
Prime Minister.
Can I just be clear on the 20-point plan? This was widely and warmly received by so many countries yesterday. He will have seen the representation at Egypt for the summit yesterday, including the Palestinian Authority, and therefore it is really important that when we get an achievement like this, that we now focus on implementing it rather than trying to unpick it. In relation to the two-state solution, I think across this House, by and large, there is agreement that there won't be lasting peace without a two-state solution, and therefore we must act to implement the 20-point plan, but we must also, as the plan itself envisages, work towards a two-state solution and not lose sight of that goal.
Anne Davis.
Diolch yn fawr, Madam Dirprwy Llafarydd. The images of ceasefire and families united are deeply heartening and a moment of relief and celebration amidst such immense suffering. Yet this fragile peace remains vulnerable, particularly to the corrosive effects of misinformation. And true and lasting peace must be built on openness, transparency and the free flow of information. What steps is the Prime Minister taking to press Israel to grant journalists access to Gaza as part of a broader commitment to truth, accountability and a just peace?
Minister.
Well, can I agree with her that the situation is vulnerable, and that's why we mustn't lose sight of what has to happen next. And we are pressing for media access, which is hugely important and needs to happen, in my view, as soon as possible, so that the extent of the devastation can be properly assessed and help with the necessary next steps.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as an officer of the all-party group on Christians in the Holy Land, I was fortunate enough to be on a delegation in Jerusalem and the West Bank last week. And it was clear to our delegation that speaking to Palestinian Christians, that they are delivering hospitals and schools for Palestinian communities. And given the need for education and healthcare to be a key part of long-term peace, what conversations is the government having with the Christian community in Israel and Palestine to ensure they're part of the conversation as well?
Prime Minister.
We are having conversations with all, particularly on this question of education and healthcare. I mean, many other issues as well, but education and healthcare are absolutely fundamental. So we're having those discussions, and I'll ensure that any further information she may have is fed into what we're doing.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Hamas leadership is making it clear that its fighters, many of whom, of course, will have been involved on October the 7th, won't disband, but they will merge into the nascent army of a Palestinian state, a state which the Prime Minister unwisely and prematurely recognised. Is he comfortable with that?
Prime Minister.
The 20-point plan is really clear on the steps that need to be taken. That is what has been hammered out with the support and approval of so many countries. That is not easy, but it is a step that many thought was unachievable. And we now have to operate to that plan, ensuring, as is absolutely clear from the plan and from all of our statements, that Hamas can have absolutely no role in the governance in Palestine. That is a clear red line. We need to operate to the 20-point plan now. The widespread agreement to it is something many people thought couldn't be achieved. It has been achieved, and now we must build on that.
Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister for the awful attack in Manchester and the attack in Peacehaven. I just wanted to also highlight the issue around aid workers and the work of UNRWA, working with many British aid organisations, including Oxfam, including Christian Aid and Islamic Relief, who are both based in my constituency. And the UN highlights that today over 500 aid workers have lost their lives, including British aid workers, so recognising the hard work that aid workers are playing. The Prime Minister has been very clear, and we are united in this House, that and Hamas must not have any role in the rebuilding of Gaza, and it has to be led by the Palestinian civil societies, communities who've had their efforts in the face of decades of siege, occupation and military violence. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that any initiative which bypasses the Palestinians in favour of externally imposed initiatives will fail?
Can I thank her first and foremost for raising the specific issue of the aid workers that have lost their lives in this conflict. Very many lives have been lost. Almost all aid workers have colleagues and friends and family members who've been lost as well, and I've heard some of that testimony firsthand, and it's extremely powerful. In relation to the process, this must now be a process that does involve Palestinians in their own future. Of course it must, and that's the only way to get to the two-state solution that we need.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure, like everyone else in this House today, I feel enormous relief at the fact that this ceasefire has been achieved, but that can be nothing to the relief felt by those Israeli families who felt they would never see their loved ones again. And those thousands of children in Gaza who were able to sleep last night without the fear of being bombed. But we've been here before, and for their sake, we cannot let the hope of today disappear in the same way that the promise of the Oslo Agreement did. And crucial to that is going to be confidence in the peace process. The Prime Minister has already alluded to the lessons that we can bring to that process from Northern Ireland. One of them is in decommissioning out Hamas. So can he tell us what support the US administration is going to offer to allow us to use that expertise and experience?
Can I thank her? And look, there is huge relief, but I think she's absolutely right. The relief for the hostages and their families and for civilians in Gaza is huge by comparison to our relief. And yes, we have been here before, and therefore we must absolutely drive through with confidence here. As to the specific way in which decommissioning might work, we're at the early stage of that discussion with the US and others. At this stage, we've simply say we stand ready to play our full part. I think and hope we will be taken up on that, and then we can work actively with others. Thank you.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today and also for this peace. May it be long-lasting. Over 1,700 health workers have lost their lives in Gaza, and many more have been physically and psychologically traumatised by the conflict. There aren't the health workers now to provide the healthcare which is needed at this urgent time. Will he ensure that the UK play its part in providing healthcare into Gaza, but also with the decimation of all the universities in Gaza, may we play a part too in training the healthcare workers of the future?
Thank you for that question. It's a really important point. We are working with others. There was a conference in Paris last week, which the Foreign Secretary attended, which had on its agenda, amongst other things, how we can support the restoration of health care, which is vitally important. As we do that, we will update the House on the measures we're taking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the last 2 years as co-chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Israel, I've hosted innumerable meetings where families of hostages have come before us pleading for our support and our help. Equally, at the same time, we've shown the screening of the terror events on the 7th of October 2023 in multiple films. And that's real-life footage captured from Hamas terrorists. But the Jewish community in this country, as my honourable friend has said, feel unsafe. They feel it's not a safe place for them to live anymore. So the Prime Minister has quite rightly alluded to the growing rise of anti-Semitism in this country. So I ask him what he's going to do on a concrete basis to eliminate this scourge, and in particular at our places of education, both our universities, so our Jewish students feel safe on campus, but equally in all of our schools, so that the young people that are growing up in this country are no longer being exposed to anti-Semitism.
Well, can I thank you for that? And it is really important that we rise to this challenge and make sure that our Jewish community feels safe and secure and part of who we are in this country. I think that does require concrete steps in relation to security and safety measures. I absolutely think we need to go further on education, particularly in our universities, but not only in our universities. And of course, although he didn't mention it, but I'm sure he knows, the NHS as well, we need to ensure that we drive out any instances we see of anti-Semitism, and I look forward to working across the House on all those initiatives, because we also need to make sure that our Jewish community see that this House is united in ensuring that they have the safety and security that they deserve.
Nadia Whittam.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the Prime Minister's statement today. After 2 years of relentless genocide committed by Israel, killing many tens of thousands of innocent people, a ceasefire is a historic and hopeful moment, even though it took far too long to achieve. Watching released Palestinians and Israelis reunite with their families yesterday was deeply moving. But Palestinians are far from free. Their rights are still being denied. They are still living under occupation. They will continue to suffer. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Palestinians must be able to exercise their right to self-determination, and Israel must face accountability for its crimes against them? And what action will he take to make this a reality?
Minister.
Well, I do agree that there will be no lasting peace without a two-state outcome, and that's why we must continue to strive towards it. And of course there must be accountability for all of those that have committed atrocity, including those that were involved on October the 7th.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I press the Prime Minister, does he agree that real lasting peace can only be achieved if there is accountability and justice? Overwhelming international consensus, both legal and scholarly, conclude that Israel's actions in Gaza were genocidal. Does the Prime Minister agree that the perpetrators of genocide must face justice? And what steps will this government take to ensure justice is achieved?
Prime Minister.
Well, I agree that accountability is important. Of course, justice is important in the Middle East, and we are strong supporters of international law and the role that that needs to play in relation to justice in the region.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement today and also welcome the ceasefire and the release of hostages as part of this historic peace deal, but a very fragile peace deal. But I also welcome the release of Palestinian women and children held in Israeli military prisons without trial. But can my honourable friend explain what steps the government will take to ensure that justice and accountability is made a reality for all victims of international law violations in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory?
Well, I thank you for our question, and it is important that I'm clear this government is committed to international law and to the accountability that that brings.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of the widely held beliefs of the catalyst that led to the pure evil that happened on the 7th of October was a fear by Iran and their terrorist proxies that Saudi Arabia was close to signing the Abraham Accords. Now, there is good news in that the Abraham Accords peace agreement between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain and Morocco have endured over the last 2 difficult years and are a model not just for regional economic cooperation, but peaceful coexistence in the region. So on the back of yesterday's agreement, can I ask the Prime Minister what concrete steps he is going to take to encourage and extend the Abraham Accords as a key part of the emerging picture in the Middle East, with a particular reference to getting Saudi Arabia back to the table?
Prime Minister.
Look, I'm grateful to him for raising the wider picture here, because the settlement across the wider Middle East is a really important backdrop and part of the background to what has happened here and what needs to happen in the future. So that is why we are talking to all parties about the immediate steps, the Abraham Accords, but also the wider settlement, if that's possible, because I think that will play a really important part in stabilising the region. That's what is wanted, broadly speaking, by most decent, reasonable people.
Jonathan Davis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The world held its breath over the last few days as a glimmer of hope was on the horizon. So can I thank the Prime Minister, Ministers, the Government and British officials for the progress that they've made with the United States to bring about this progress. This progress of the peace will only be embedded and sustained if it is built with ordinary people, Palestinians and Israelis, who yearn for peace. So can the Prime Minister tell me what steps he's undertaking to make sure that happens?
Minister.
Well, it is important we involve Israelis and Palestinians across the board and communities in the rebuilding, the physical rebuilding, but also the rebuilding of the relationships which were there just over 2 years ago, which held at least the prospect of a better future for the next generation. So we need to rebuild that on all fronts.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I congratulate the Prime Minister in getting us to this point? But the Labour Government's role in decommissioning in Northern Ireland is not as complete as portrayed. In a memo in the 17th of January 2003, an advisor to the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair, said, "The IRA will never be able to account for all their weapons or retrieve them. What we should perhaps aim for is a few more big symbolic acts of decommissioning and then declare that the process is complete." Madam Deputy Speaker, that advisor was a certain Jonathan Powell, now the National Security Advisor. So will the Prime Minister give assurances that should the Government be given such a role, that it won't be as lax?
Prime Minister.
Well, I think the work on decommissioning Northern Ireland was really important, and that's the basis upon which we put forward our offer to stand ready with others to work on decommissioning in relation to the Middle East.
Olivia Blake.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to associate myself with the Prime Minister's condemnation of the horrific anti-Semitic terrorist attack on the Heaton Park Synagogue and, of course, the arson attack in Peacehaven. The Prime Minister emphasised the UK's commitment to humanitarian support, and we all know that whilst there's a ceasefire, which we all welcome, the humanitarian crisis is still very much ongoing. So can I ask the Prime Minister to confirm what extra monitoring and new mechanisms and assurances he is seeking in order to make sure that parties on the ground are able to get the essential aid to every single person who needs it within Gaza?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank her for that. We are having those conversations about the practical measures that can be taken on the ground with others, particularly the Jordanians, in terms of the physical arrangements that they think need to be in place to allow the aid in and then dissipated at pace, and that's a project we're working on tirelessly at the moment.
Greg Stafford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I associate myself with the warm and welcome news that this ceasefire has happened, and I hope it moves to a lasting peace. What assurances has the Prime Minister received from neighbouring partners, specifically Egypt, and what specific actions will he take, firstly to ensure that humanitarian aid can reach Gaza, but secondly that it is only humanitarian aid that reaches Gaza and that weapons, personnel and materials that could aid terrorists do not enter Gaza?
Prime Minister.
Well, he makes a really good point, and the basis upon which we're having our discussions is that it must be humanitarian aid, and it must be humanitarian in the sense it genuinely is for that purpose, and that it's getting to the people who most need it. That does come down to the nuts and bolts of the practical arrangements on the ground with some of the neighbouring countries, and they're the discussions that we're having.
Claire Hanna.
I don't think anybody could fail to be moved by the scenes yesterday of hostages finally being reunited with their families and Gazans being able to contemplate days and nights without hunger and without bombardment. I would love to be able to celebrate and to believe as they are doing, and they should be given the space to do. But like many, I am anxious because we know that a ceasefire is not the same as a lasting peace. Can the Prime Minister assure my constituents that the UK Government will continue to pursue accountability for past crimes, for building and rebuilding to be done with survivors and not over the top of them, and to ensure that there will continue to be justice for those facing aggression in the West Bank every day?
Minister.
Let me be clear, in the rebuilding that must go on, there has to be the bringing together of communities, but also the necessary accountability and justice for a full rebuilding towards a lasting settlement.
Monica Harding.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to flood Gaza with aid. The UN estimates that $4 billion is needed this year to address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and just 28% of this money has been pledged. The UK's contribution to humanitarian relief this year will only total $116 million. So with the entire population of Gaza in need of some form of humanitarian assistance, does the Prime Minister believe that the UK's contribution to Gaza's relief is adequate?
We have made a significant contribution. As we go forward, we're looking at public and private commitments to the reconstruction project that needs to take place. Not just the aid, but the rebuilding as well is a huge challenge facing us all, and we will rise to that with others.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the Prime Minister's statement. And I hugely welcome the ceasefire and the initial Gaza peace plan, including the release of hostages and prisoners, stopping of the bombardment of Gaza and the start of aid to trickle in. But peace is fragile. So can the Prime Minister reassure the House of this government's long-term commitment to working with international partners to support the rebuilding of Gaza, physically and politically, to ensure a lasting peace and a pathway to Palestinian statehood?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I can give her that important assurance. I thank her for her question.
Danny Kruger.
Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, this ceasefire is tremendous news, and my sincere congratulations to everybody who was involved in bringing it about, whoever they were, including the British government. I was in Israel last week, and on the day that the ceasefire was announced, I visited the Nova festival site, and I spoke to civilians and soldiers on the Gaza border. And the Israelis I spoke to were deeply dismayed that the British government had decided to recognise the state of Palestine before Hamas had released its hostages, let alone disarmed. Does the Prime Minister understand why Israel cannot tolerate the idea of a state on its border that poses a security risk to its citizens? And will he undertake not to move forward to support the establishment of a Palestinian state until there is more than the promise, there is actually the reality of security for Israel?
Minister.
The terms upon which we recognise Palestine, in which all the countries did recently, was on the express acknowledgement that Hamas can play no part in the government. That is at the heart of the New York Declaration as well, and is absolutely part of the 20-point plan. And I think it's really important that we assert that and reassert it. That's been the constant position of this government, and my personal position, so I can give him that reassurance.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I warmly welcome the Prime Minister's statement, particularly his commitment to seeking a lasting, long-term peace in the region, because Israel will not be secure, the Palestinian people will not be free until we break this endless cycle of violence. But turning to the immediate situation on the ground, the Gazans still face a man-made famine. So I really welcome the flooding in of aid that the Prime Minister has talked about in his statement. But could you just say a little bit more about the timescale for that and how soon we can start to see that aid getting in and having an effect on the ground?
Prime Minister.
We need it to go in today, tomorrow and the coming days. We cannot delay on that front, and that is amongst the most essential tasks that lay ahead, particularly in relation to the man-made famine.
Lee Dillon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I add my support for the ceasefire yesterday and the first tentative steps on the journey to peace? President Trump has spoken about a board of peace, and one of the names floated as being on that is our former Prime Minister, Sir Tony Blair. So could the Prime Minister confirm if Sir Tony Blair is going to take a seat on that board? Is that as a private citizen or as a representative of His Majesty's government? And what role can this House play in scrutinising any appointment going forward and the progress of that board? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
Well, the board is an important part of the architecture. It's for others to decide what the membership of that board will be, but I can give the commitment that we will report to the House on any developments in that regard.
Josh Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a huge relief to all of us that the hostages are sleeping at home with their families where they belong after 2 years of unimaginable horror. But this plan and the recognition of Palestine must only be the start of peace and accountability. Children are dying from a man-made famine. So can the Prime Minister please assure us that we will flood Gaza with aid and continue to respect the judgments and decisions of international courts and tribunals?
I can give him our assurance on both those issues.
Shawkat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the ceasefire, the release of the hostages, and take solace in some knowledge, or at least hope, that unlike other debates of this nature, at the end of this one, countless Palestinian children will not have been killed by the IDF. But I'd like to ask the Prime Minister if he agrees with me that the people of Gaza do not need a colonial viceroy, Tony Blair, anywhere near determining their future. The former Prime Minister, who has been in meetings with the Trump administration, is proposing a US-administered Gaza, rebuilding Gaza resort on top of mass graves of men, women and children. So will the Prime Minister condemn this plan and Tony Blair's involvement in rebuilding?
Prime Minister.
I'm not going to condemn a plan that I welcomed yesterday. I think it's a really important step forward. It's a step almost everybody in this House has welcomed, including the Honourable Member. What is important now is that we build on that plan. It will be for others to decide the particular representation. Of course, there is the committee that will be really important in relation to the day-to-day matters in Gaza, on which, of course, there must be proper Palestinian representation. These are matters still to be determined, but I really think that it would be better if we don't try and unpick where we got to yesterday before we've even started to implement it and to try and move forward, because that will, I think, inevitably take us backwards.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We know that humanitarian aid saves lives, rebuilds lives and plays that crucial stabilising role. I thank the Prime Minister for his emphasis on getting aid into Gaza, and it has been heartening to hear from UN agencies who are now crossing the border for the first time since March, getting in vital supplies like cooking gas and medicines. But I know some NGOs, including British NGOs, are still struggling to get the permissions they need to be able to operate. So can I ask the Prime Minister what more he will do to ensure that these immediate humanitarian relief efforts become a sustained, scaled-up part of Gaza's recovery, and that our British NGOs can also play their full part?
Minister.
Well, I thank you for raising this important point and can reassure that is an issue we're raising with partners for all the reasons she set out.
Clive Jones.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Prime Minister and President Trump get along, does the Prime Minister think that he can secure the support of President Trump to get genuine progress towards securing a two-state solution, the only path to ensuring peace, security and dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians?
Prime Minister.
Well, look, I certainly agree it's the only path, and we are, of course, talking to our allies about it, including our American allies, in the way that he would expect as trusted, respected partners trying to address one of the most intractable problems in recent history, and will continue to do so.
Kirstin Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And like others, I welcome the ceasefire and the return of hostages to their families, but that is very much tempered by the loss of thousands of lives these past 2 years, loved ones that are never going to be able to return home. Elected representatives, humanitarian organisations and individuals across the world, including our constituents, have given voice to the plight of the people of Gaza these past 2 years. So can he tell me what efforts will be made to ensure the people of Gaza will be safe and free to shape the future of Gaza, and for their voices to be heard in the months and years to come?
Well, can I thank her for reminding us that, however welcome the news, it is tempered by the loss over the last 2 years in Gaza and in Israel, and it is essential that the voices are heard of those that are most affected by this and are part of the rebuild that is now necessary.
Jim Allister.
I gladly join in the tributes of appreciation to all, including President Trump, who made the long-awaited release of the hostages a reality yesterday. But could I press the Prime Minister on the issue of the disarming of Hamas? For the Prime Minister, is that wholly non-negotiable? How is it to be delivered? And if it is not delivered in totality, where does that leave this nation, having recognised a Palestine which then would have a continuing presence of an armed and controlling Hamas?
Prime Minister.
Well, it must be non-negotiable, and that's why it's written into the 20-point plan, which is why we are now putting ourselves forward to play a part in the decommissioning, because it's only by decommissioning that we can ensure that the threat from Hamas is removed, and that's why it's in the plan. That's why we want to play our full part, and we'll do everything we can with other allies to bring that about.
Lizzie Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and, of course, welcome an end to the killing in Gaza. And I would like to ask the Prime Minister what guarantees are in place to ensure that humanitarian aid can now reach Gaza without interruption, and that this aid will be independent of the whim of the Israeli government or any other actor on the ground.
Well, we're doing all we can to ensure that that is the case, because it's important for all the reasons that she well understands. That now involves the practical measures, working with other countries to ensure the aid can get in at speed, at volume. It is beginning to go in, but it's by no means in the right volume or speed, even now after the agreement, and that's what we need to focus on.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to associate myself with the tributes paid to Lord Campbell from across the House, and to thank the Prime Minister for his statement. I also welcome the release of all hostages and the several hundred Palestinian detainees as well. But we must remember that there are over 10,000 captives, some prisoners but many without charge, that are still held in Israeli prisons, and I hope the government will work towards the release of the innocents that are being held. The rebuilding and the interim and final governance of Gaza must be Palestinian-led, not by Western actors. The Palestinians have suffered over 2 years of a relentless genocide and decades of Israeli siege, occupation, military violence and oppression. I totally agree with the position that Hamas must not have any role to play in any future governance of Palestine. However, and there's no excuse for what happened on October the 7th, but one of the root causes that's preventing a two-state solution from becoming reality is the unlawful occupation of Israel.
Can the honourable gentleman please get to his question? Thank you.
So will the Prime Minister confirm to this House when the government will be in full compliance with the ICJ advisory opinion on not doing anything that helps perpetuate the unlawful occupation?
We will come back to the House on that. We proudly uphold international law.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister's urgent statement on the Middle East also included a celebration of our newly formed relationship and trade deal with India. Did the Prime Minister's discussions with PM Modi last week also include raising the case of my West Dunbartonshire constituent Jagtar Singh Johal? And if so, did he insist upon his immediate release and return home to his family in Dumbarton? He is 8 years arbitrarily detained in India. Enough is enough. Prime Minister, it's time to bring him home.
Well, can I thank him for his question and his work on this? And yes, I did raise it with Prime Minister Modi, and UK officials regularly raise this case. And the Foreign Secretary will be meeting Jagtar's family in coming weeks, and we'll keep the honourable member updated.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We welcome the news very much that there is a ceasefire and that those hostages have finally been returned home after 2 long years in unimaginable conditions. Smiles on the faces of family members is a joy to behold. While President Trump deserves much credit for the peace deal, our own Prime Minister and our own United Kingdom government also deserve some credit for the role that they've played in support of trying to get the peace. What discussions have been held with the United States of America to ensure that Hamas terrorist murderous intent is stopped? Hamas have been systematically murdering all those who have stood up against them and since the ceasefire took place. Many executions of those within the Gaza township have been an example. Hamas must be destroyed. What has been done to see Hamas weapons removed and their influence eradicated entirely? Thank you.
Well, can I wholeheartedly agree with him in terms of the spirit and intent behind the question? Hamas is a terrorist organisation that has inflicted violence on far too many individuals and destruction, and they can play absolutely no part in the future. And our recognition of Palestine was expressly on that basis. And we will continue to work with other countries to ensure that that is the situation, because it's vital that that is part of a peaceful and lasting settlement in the region.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the Prime Minister's statement today and would like to thank him and his ministerial team and their advisers for all the work that's gone on over many months to get us to the point that we're at, where there is some hope for peace in Gaza and also for peace for Israel. But in this process, as we go forward and as we try to build peace, can he ensure that the voices of women, so often excluded from such processes, are heard and that women are at the table when decisions are being made?
Well, she makes a very good point. We must ensure that women are a part of the future build here, and we will ensure that we do so.
Sarah Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome yesterday's ceasefire agreement and the Prime Minister's statement today, and just want to recognise the leadership that he and his ministers have shown on this issue so tirelessly for such a long time. Now, we know sustaining the peace is dependent on humanitarian services scaling up rapidly in Gaza, and many NGOs are currently struggling with Israel's kind of restrictive and politicised new registration measures, leaving many in limbo and unable to work alongside UN agencies to scale up those services. What is the Prime Minister doing to ensure that we address this, tackle it, and make sure the needs of Palestinians are met as quickly as possible?
Minister.
Well, she raises a really important issue in relation to some of the hurdles and barriers that are put in the way of those wanting to deliver aid, and we are working with others to scale up the volume and speed with which aid can get in.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement this afternoon? There will be a couple of moments whilst the front benches swap over and we do some furniture removal. Which brings us to the next business this afternoon, statement on the Northern Ireland Troubles. Secretary of State Hilary Benn.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the legacy of the Troubles, which still hangs heavily over the lives of so many people in Northern Ireland and indeed across the United Kingdom. The Good Friday Agreement, that extraordinary act of political courage, brought peace, but although its architects knew that legacy would have to be dealt with, they were not able to do so. This is, therefore, the unfinished business of that agreement, and why so many, too many, victims and survivors are still waiting for answers about what exactly happened to those they loved so much. The previous government's Legacy Act failed to win support in Northern Ireland, failed to comply with our international human rights obligations, and was undeliverable. Whatever its intentions, it was no basis for trying to move forward. And that is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government is today introducing new primary legislation and laying a draft remedial order under the Human Rights Act as we seek to fulfil our King's Speech commitment to repeal and replace the Legacy Act. Madam Deputy Speaker, this legislation will give effect to the framework that I announced with the Irish Government on the 19th of September, which reflects the principles of the Stormont House Agreement and contains sovereign commitments by both the UK and Irish governments. The new Troubles Bill will reform the Independent Commission, to be renamed the Legacy Commission, with statutory oversight to provide accountability and confidence, and learning from Operation Canova, a statutory victims and survivors advisory group. Significantly strengthen the governance of the Commission with 2 co-directors of investigations, statutory conflict of interest duties, and appointments made only following independent advice. Enhance the investigative powers of the Commission and put in place a fairer disclosure regime, ensuring that the Commission has the powers it needs to find answers for families and can make public the maximum possible information consistent with the state's responsibility to protect life and national security. The bill will also fulfil the commitment we have made to restore the small number of Troubles-related inquests which were stopped in their tracks by the Legacy Act, and refer the other inquests that had not yet commenced to the Solicitor General to independently consider whether in each case they are most appropriately dealt with by the reformed Legacy Commission or via the coronial system. Enable the reformed Commission to hold new proceedings in cases that transfer to it from the coronial system. Consistent with the provisions in the Inquiries Act, this will provide for public hearings, the consideration of sensitive information in closed hearings, and effective next of kin participation, including through legal representation. We will also address in the bill, rather than in the remedial order, the UK Supreme Court ruling in the Adams interim custody orders case regarding the application of the Carltona principle. We must put beyond doubt Parliament's intention by clarifying that the relevant legislation allowed such orders to be made by junior ministers as well as by the Secretary of State. Madam Deputy Speaker, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the 250,000 Northern Ireland veterans who served with honour and distinction to keep people safe and who worked with the police and other emergency services in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Their service and their sacrifice will never be forgotten. That is why, having worked closely with the Defence Secretary and the Armed Forces Minister, the Government is introducing strong safeguards for veterans that respond directly to the concerns that have been expressed to us. These safeguards will also apply to other people, such as former police officers. They will mean that no witness will need to travel to Northern Ireland to engage with legacy mechanisms. They will have a right to do so remotely because coroners and judges in the Commission will be legally required to allow this, and support for veterans will be available to assist them in doing so. The Commission will be under a duty not to duplicate the work of previous investigations unless there are compelling reasons that make it essential to do so. The welfare of veterans will be given proper consideration as part of any assessment as to whether they are required to give evidence. This will include the right for veterans to seek anonymity when doing so. And our protections will not be limited to legislation. Any contact with veterans will be facilitated through the Ministry of Defence, protecting veterans from cold calling, and veterans will not be required to rehearse the historical context surrounding incidents where such information can be obtained from other sources, including the Ministry of Defence. These measures will provide what the 3 UK Veterans Commissioners have called for: not immunity from the law, but fairness under it. Madam Deputy Speaker, the remedial order, which I am also laying today, will remove the previous government's much criticised immunity scheme, which offered false promises, was never introduced, and would have enabled those who committed the most appalling terrorist crimes to be granted immunity from prosecution. The principal reason why the Act was so strongly opposed in Northern Ireland. It will lift also the current prohibition on troubles-related civil proceedings. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am grateful to the Taoiseach, Simon Harris, and his team for their open and constructive approach in reaching the framework agreement, which recognises that helping families affected by the Troubles is a shared responsibility. And that is why the joint framework contains specific and unprecedented commitments by the Irish Government to facilitate the fullest possible cooperation of the Irish authorities with a reformed Legacy Commission, establish a dedicated unit within An Garda Síochána to deal with Troubles-related cases, including investigating all outstanding cases in Ireland, and make a financial contribution of €25 million to help fund legacy mechanisms. This is, of course, in addition to the £250 million already committed by the UK Government. And where required, legislation will be introduced by the Irish Government to implement these commitments. We are also establishing with the Irish Government an independent commission on information retrieval, initially on a pilot basis, to provide families with an additional means of getting information. Madam Deputy Speaker, since my appointment last year, I have had many discussions with political parties, victims and survivors organisations, human rights groups, veterans and others affected by the Troubles. Given the views held by so many people, often diametrically opposed, it was always going to be impossible to set out a plan that gives everybody everything that they want. There will be elements of our approach that some people will welcome and others will not. I also recognise, because of what has gone before, there is a great lack of trust in all of us in this House on the part of victims and survivors. That is unfortunately the reality, but it is not, and it never has been, an argument for not trying to find a way forward. And I hope that those who want to see a fair and effective approach to legacy, which can command greater support in Northern Ireland, will recognise that these measures represent fundamental reform and will therefore be given a chance to succeed. Time waits for no one, least of all for the many families who lost loved ones, and they ultimately will be the judge of whether these new arrangements can give them the answers that they have sought for so long. And I hope that we will together be able to grasp this opportunity and so help the people of Northern Ireland to look to a future freer of the burden of the past. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State, Alex Burkhardt.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. The last government legislated to draw a line under Troubles-era litigation. That litigation was inevitably weighted against those who sought to protect our country from terrorism. Exactly. It was inevitably weighted against those who keep records and whose servicemen are easy to locate and contact. Even today, vexatious claims are being made. Only last week, a judicial review into a 1991 case was rightly thrown out by the High Court in Belfast. The judge described the challenge as utterly divorced from reality, but not before the former Special Forces soldier at the centre of it had to endure 4 years of investigation. Yeah. Mindful of cases such as this, the last government sought to draw a line, and with its actions today, this government is erasing that line. And as it does so, many former servicemen will again feel, with profound unease, that the lawyers are coming. I hope the House will this afternoon spare a thought for them. I know we will have a lot of time to debate the legislation the government is laying, but there are a number of specific questions that I would like to ask the Secretary of State now. First, on the resumption of inquests in civil cases, will he tell the House how many inquests will be restored and how many will be referred to the Solicitor General? Can he specifically tell the House whether that list will include the 1987 Lockall case. Likewise, civil cases is to reopen. It's thought that at the time of Prohibition, many hundreds of such cases, affecting perhaps thousands of people, were before the Belfast courts. What is the NIO's calculation of the number of civil cases that are now likely to proceed? I ask this, Madam Deputy Speaker, because there are clear financial consequences to reopening legacy in this way. The Secretary of State referred to £250 million already committed. Indeed, it was committed by the last government to deal with legacy as we framed it. But it is now clear that the new Legacy Commission is to have a much bigger remit than the ICRIR. If so, will its budget be increased? And if not, how will it be expected to function? Similarly, the police service in Northern Ireland has raised very serious concerns about the amount of money they will need to support reopened inquests and civil cases. Policy Exchange has placed this cost on the police as around £90 million at a time when police numbers in Northern Ireland are at an all-time low. There is a very real prospect that without additional funding from the Secretary of State, frontline policing in Northern Ireland will be further reduced. Can the Secretary of State make a commitment that that won't happen? Third, the government has briefed journalists today that legislation will ban Gerry Adams from receiving compensation for his detention in the 1970s. But the Secretary of State's statement made no reference to that. Can he tell the House unequivocally that Mr. Adams will not receive one penny of compensation? Fourth, the Secretary of State listed a number of protections for veterans in court. But it's already the case that anonymity, age-related considerations and remote hearings are available at the discretion of the court. And that was apparent to the Taoiseach when, on the 19th of September, he emphasised that no new protections would be available to veterans. Does the Secretary of State agree with Mr Harris? There has also been some confusion about whether these protections would extend to paramilitaries. On the 25th of September, the Prime Minister claimed they did not. Can the Secretary of State be definitive for the House? Last, there is the question of the involvement of the Republic of Ireland in legacy. This has proved deeply controversial. I am sure the Secretary of State will be asked questions about it this afternoon. However, I was interested to see that the Republic has made commitments to get the Garda to investigate unresolved troubles-related incidents within its jurisdiction and to legislate to enable the fullest possible cooperation of the relevant Irish authorities with the Legacy Commission. If this is so, if this is to happen, it is to be welcomed. Because during the Troubles, the UK repeatedly sought extraditions from the Republic to bring terrorist charges. In the vast majority of cases, they were turned down. Following 1998, the former Irish Justice Minister Michael McDowell said that the Irish government gave a de facto amnesty to the IRA. And indeed, there are very many instances of possible collusion between the Garda and the Provisional IRA which have never received the attention they deserve. Kingsmill, the murder of Ian Sproul, Bloody Friday, Taban, Le Mans, the list goes on. I sincerely hope that the Republic will now engage sincerely, deeply and honestly, and I hope the Secretary of State will ensure that it does.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his response. I mean, he says at the beginning that the last government sought to draw a line. It didn't work. It didn't work. And in the act of seeking to do that, and this is the one question that the now opposition has never been able to answer, it decided it would give terrorists immunity from prosecution. I've never heard, and oh yes, that is what the last government did, and I've never heard a justification. Yes, it did. Oh yes, it did. And it didn't work. It didn't have support in Northern Ireland. How can Northern Ireland proceed to deal with the legacy of the Troubles when the legislation the last government passed had no support in Northern Ireland? To answer his specific questions, 9 inquests will be restored. The remaining 24 will go into the sifting process. That 9 will include Lockall because the Conservative Attorney General 10 years ago ordered a new inquest into Lockall, a point never referred to by the opposition. And it was one of the cases that had begun, and therefore it falls within the group that will be restored. The rest will be considered in the sifting process by the Solicitor General. The number of civil cases will depend on those who choose to bring them or resume them. On the PSNI, I would say to the honourable gentleman that prior to the 1st of May last year, the PSNI had over, 1,000 cases on its books, and that is no longer the case. And the Legacy Commission, which the UK government is funding, is now responsible for looking at all cases referred to it, and that is a cost that is borne by the UK government and not by the Department of Justice in Northern Ireland. And to the extent that cases are no longer inquests but go into the Commission, the costs will be borne by the UK government and not by the Department of Justice in Northern Ireland. On the issue of interim custody orders, as I indicated to the House a moment ago, the legislation will make it clear that the signing of interim custody orders by junior ministers was always lawful. But we have also decided, in placing a draft remedial order before the House today, that sections 46 and 47 will now remain in place until the provisions of the bill take effect. Now, this will deal with the point that some people have raised about avoiding a gap, but we all have to recognise that 46 and 47 proved to be an ineffective way of dealing with this issue. And the honourable gentleman smiles, but he knows that that is the case. The protections we have brought in for veterans, we have done it with the motivation of protecting veterans. And on the involvement of the Republic of Ireland, well, I join the honourable gentleman, a point of unity at the end. I join him in welcoming the commitment of the Irish government to this partnership, because the history of Northern Ireland teaches us a lot of progress is made when the two guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement work together, and there are many people in Northern Ireland who would like to get answers from the Garda and from the Irish authorities. At the moment, the Irish government is refusing to cooperate. Why? Because of the last government's Legacy Act, and I look forward to them participating in the process in the months and the years ahead.
Select Committee, Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to see from the joint framework that the Government has listened to some of the key concerns voiced by stakeholders during my committee's inquiry into legacy. No doubt those stakeholders will want to study the detail of the proposals that my right honourable friend is publishing today. To that end, what consultation has the Government had with victims and survivors groups since the joint framework was announced, and in what ways has this informed the legislation laid today?
Secretary of State.
Well, the legislation is about to be published, but in the 14 months since I took up this post, I've had many conversations with families, victims, and the other organisations and groups that I listed in my statement. And the bill that the House will see is the result of that process of discussion, listening, drafting, attempting to respond, not in a way that will please everyone, but attempting to respond to the mess, frankly, the mess that this government was left by the last government that passed a piece of legislation that did not work, didn't have support, and was found by the courts in a number of respects not to be compatible with our obligations. The question now will be for all of those groups, having seen the framework agreement we reached with the Irish government, do they feel that the legislation give effects to that, and will it enable Northern Ireland to move forward in dealing with these really intractable problems?
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Paul Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State in advance for so advanced sight of his statement. As this is my first statement as the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for Northern Ireland, I want to begin by recognising the deep scars left by the troubles on families, communities across the island of Ireland and these islands. The pain, loss and legacy of that conflict remain deeply felt to this day. Whilst the Liberal Democrats welcome the recent agreement between the British and Irish governments, the true test of this deal will lie in the detail of the legislation that follows. The government's stated intention to promote an honest attempt at reconciliation, to draw a line under decades of division, is one that every member of this House can understand. Victims' families deserve truth, justice and closure. Equally, our veterans deserve and must be afforded fairness and protection from injustice. As the Secretary of State has said, the Legacy Act introduced by the Conservatives failed to gain the support of any of the parties in Stormont, victims' groups or the Irish government. This lack of consensus speaks volumes, but not loud enough, it would seem, for His Majesty's official opposition. I look forward to examining the contents of this new bill in detail, proposing constructive amendments. My party will engage fully with the government as lasting reconciliation depends upon transparency, fairness and independent oversight. That means an effective information retrieval body with statutory disclosure powers, meaningful participation for victims and safeguards to uphold both justice and compassion for veterans and victims alike. May I therefore ask the Secretary of State 3 questions. First, how will this bill ensure reconciliation is not imposed from above but built from the ground up? Secondly, based on the many meetings my party has had with veterans and their representatives, what specific safeguards will the government include to ensure fairness, proportionality and proper protections for those who serve with integrity? And lastly, how will this government ensure that prosecution under the law, or the possibility of it, can ever be used to harm, oppress or discredit those who fought for our country, regardless of the final verdict?
Well, may I welcome the honourable gentleman to his new role and to say that I genuinely look forward to working with him on these and other matters, given his interest in Northern Ireland, which is shared right across the House. On his 3 specific questions, the first thing I would say is that no legislation can enable people to feel reconciled in some way to what happened. In the end, reconciliation has to come from within. And that's why the title reconciliation will not be in the new name of the Legacy Commission, because it is a consequence of a process that we are trying to put in place if families can find answers. And I would urge the House to concentrate on that, because that is what this is all about, trying to enable families to find answers. Secondly, the safeguards, I did draw attention to them in my opening statement, and he will be able to see when the bill is published later today how they're given legal expression. And on his point about prosecution, I would simply say this. There have been 1 or 2 comments in some of these discussions. People have talked about politically motivated prosecutions or vexatious prosecutions. I think it's very important, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the House upholds the integrity and independence of the prosecutorial authorities. A fundamental bedrock of our legal system is that independent prosecutors make those decisions. And to suggest they are any way politically motivated, in my view, is profoundly mistaken.
Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to pay tribute to the Secretary of State and to the Secretary of Defence and the Armed Forces Minister for working so hard to achieve this new phase of the peace settlement in Northern Ireland. As we celebrate peace starting in the Middle East, this is a reminder of how long it takes to build peace and how important justice is for peace. Does he agree with me that by shutting down investigations, including the deaths of more than 200 Operation Banner soldiers, without an adequate alternative, the unlawful Legacy Act failed so many families and victims of the Troubles, and the mess had to be undone?
Well, first of all, could I thank my honourable friend for her question, but above all to thank her for her great service in the Northern Ireland office. It was a real pleasure to work with her, and she did so much during her time working in the department. I do agree with her, because those service families, they want to find answers. And I met some time ago the family of Tony Harrison, who served and was murdered in Belfast, and his mother and his brother told me how outraged they were by the Legacy Act, because it proposed that those who had killed their son could get immunity from prosecution. And that is why it is so important that we put that misguided approach on one side, so that all families, service families and other families, can find answers.
Sir Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, it's worth remembering that most victims are not in a group. They're not in the media. They're not taking action. They just want to know what happened to their loved ones. And as we debate this during the next period, I hope we can all collectively remember that. Investigations are key to delivering to those families. But can I ask him a couple of specific questions on sex offenders who were combatants. There's some concern that there'll be protection of those combatants who may have been involved in rapes and other sexual activity, and if you could look at that as the bill protects, to make sure that victims are able to talk as much as and have the protection as well as those ex-combatants. And what thought has he given to a change of government in the south? Should Sinn Féin take power, and delivery of the Irish contribution and commitments in that scenario?
Well, I am grateful as ever to the right honourable gentleman for his wise words, and would once again want to pay tribute to the distinguished role he played in trying to move some of these and many other questions in Northern Ireland forward during his time as the Secretary of State. On the latter point, it is not for me to speculate on what is going to happen as a result of the decisions of the Irish electorate. The current coalition government has given a commitment. These were two governments coming together, each making sovereign commitments, promising to carry them out in their own jurisdictions. I think it is a hugely significant moment, because you have to go back 11 years to the last time the last government was able to reach agreement with the Irish government in the form of the Stormont House Agreement. On the first question, when he sees the bill, he will see that we are making some changes to allow some other matters to be investigated, because I am conscious of the point that he has raised.
Katrina Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the statement and the progress made by the Government and that of the Republic of both this Government and that of the Republic of Ireland. As my honourable friend from Gower said, as a Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee, we've heard of the heartbreak of many of those who lost loved ones over the course of the Troubles, and regardless of the background of those loved ones, they deserve answers. Consistently, the response that we received for good practice for replacement was that of Operation Canova, that many of those in Ireland are too close to this, and by bringing suitably qualified individuals from other parts of the UK should be considered as part of any process. Has this been? Can I ask the Secretary of State if this has been considered as in the new bill?
Well, I would make 2 points to my honourable friend. The first is that, as I alluded to, we have drawn from the experience of Operation Canova in saying that part of the bill will create a statutory victims and survivors advisory group to ensure that the Commission, in the way it goes about its work, takes account of victims and survivors, and that will include a representative of those who served the state during the Troubles. On the second point, one thing that we are doing is to put much tougher statutory provisions in place relating to conflicts of interest, which is why there are going to be two directors of investigation. One will have experience of investigating cases in Northern Ireland, the other will not. And that will address concern that some families have had about who is going to be looking into their case. And we should not forget, despite the nearly 100 cases that the Commission is currently investigating, and I welcome that, there are far too many families in Northern Ireland who said, I'm not going anywhere near the Commission. And part of the purpose of what we're seeking to do is to build confidence on the part of more families in Northern Ireland to go to the Commission and get answers.
Gavin Robinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I firstly just welcome the Minister to his place and to the Department, and to welcome the new shadow spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats, and thanking very personally the role played by the Honourable Lady Ford Putney during her time in the Northern Ireland office as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, whenever the announcement was raised and announced with the Irish Government during a House of Commons recess, you could consider that cynical. That we stand here today during a statement on legislation that has yet to be introduced, and therefore we have no detail, as disgraceful. And the suggestion that the Irish Government have committed to legislate at all is entirely fanciful. They have not. But the detail we do have is that the Secretary of State wishes for the Solicitor General to be the person to carry out the sifting process as to whether cases should go to inquest through the coronial system or to the Legacy Commission. Now, in Northern Ireland, we have an Advocate General. The Advocate General is England and Wales's Attorney General. I'm clear in my mind that Richard Hermer would be wholly inappropriate to have his hands anywhere near cases touching on legacy of the past, given how he has conflicted himself. So will the Secretary of State indicate, has the Attorney General of this country reclused himself from this process? Has he, as Secretary of State, decided to exclude the Attorney General from this process? And is he legislating in a way that will exclude every Attorney General from this process, or is it just Richard Hermer?
Well, I would say to the Right Honourable gentleman, I'm sorry to have heard what he has just said in relation to very substantial proposals contained in the framework document, and I grant him the bill will be published shortly and he will have a chance to read it. I've been accused of many things in my time in public life. Being cynical is not one of them, so that is a first. The truth about the announcement of the framework, well, it may be the beginning of a number of such accusations. But anyway, I leave that to others who want to take the debate in that particular direction. The framework was announced because it was a joint framework between two governments, and that means that there had to be a negotiation about when it came out. But I did undertake to the Speaker at the time that I would come to the House as quickly as possible to make a statement. I laid a written ministerial statement in the House yesterday, and I came today at the first available opportunity with members here, bearing in mind the whip we had yesterday, to subject what we had agreed to scrutiny. I have every confidence in the Solicitor General, and I'm sure she will do an excellent job in sifting these cases against three criteria, which will be laid out in statute. One, what impact will sensitive information have on the ability of inquests to actually complete the case? The second will be speed. Time waits for no one. And the third will be, what is the view of those who are involved in the cases, including families?
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for his statement, and I welcome the government's focus on protections package for veterans. Last week I met with David, Ishbel and Gary from Yateley and Hawley Royal British Legion, who do an excellent job supporting veterans in my community. We discussed the new veterans protection package announced by the government, including the protections against repeated investigations. Many veterans from my constituency served courageously for our nation in very, very difficult conditions, and they asked me to raise a number of questions on behalf of veterans who served in Northern Ireland. Can the Minister set out how the government will ensure that these protections are absolutely watertight in practice, so that veterans are not subjected to repeated distressing investigations in old age? And what steps are being taken with the Irish Government and other partners to ensure that accountability and justice are applied consistently and fairly on all sides?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for her question. She's such a strong advocate for the many veterans that she represents. I would encourage her to look at the legislation to see the nature of those legislative commitments to give effect to the veterans' protections. There will be a couple that will not be in legislation because they are entirely in our own hands, agreeing a protocol with the Commission to ensure that there is no cold calling. And I would like to take this opportunity, and it's very remiss of me not to have welcomed my new deputy to the House. This is the first time we've had the chance to sit together on the front bench. But I want to pay tribute to the Minister from the Ministry of Defence, the Minister for Armed Forces, who has played a really important and significant role in putting these protections in place. And I note that Lieutenant General Sir Nick Pope, the chair of the Confederation of Service Charities, has said the Confederation welcomes, and I quote, welcomes the development of the safeguards that have been put in place to offer protection to those within the armed forces community who are affected by legacy issues. I too welcome that recognition of what we've done.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Deputy Speaker, obviously the devil lies in the detail of these things, as never more so in Northern Ireland. So before the bill comes eventually before us, we really can't say for certain whether it's good, bad or indifferent, as is often the case. But I do raise 2 points. First of all, I think mentioning this agreement, as it seems in here, which I find a little bit wishy-washy over Ireland's role in all of this, does have a huge amount of history attached to it, as has been said by honourable friends. Ireland's role in this over the past in refusing in any way to hand over people that were quite really guilty of the most vexatious, disgusting attacks on civilians and on soldiers does seem to me rather peculiar. And so we wait and see what that actually means, because Ireland says they're committed. I'd love to see what that commitment actually means. I do say when it comes to vexatious prosecutions, and I see that in this note that we've got here, they talk about protection from repeated investigations, unless there are compelling reasons to do so. My concern with things like that, they are little hooks that allow development through legislation and not actually powerful tools to do what the right honourable gentleman says. And so I would urge him right now to be very clear when this legislation comes forward that this cannot be broken through, and the definition of compelling needs to be tied right down.
Well, I note the point that the right honourable gentleman makes about the past, and I'm not going to dissent from what he said, but this is an attempt to move beyond the past and the history, to try and move forward to something that is better in the future. And look, in the end, people will judge the commitments that this government has made, and people will judge the commitments that the Irish government has made. But the deal has been signed in good faith, and we are committed to doing what we promised to do. The purpose of the Commission, which after all the last government established, and which I took the decision not to abolish, but to reform. Many people criticised that. They wanted it scrapped completely and start again. I thought that it would have been a mistake, because time waits for no one, and we'd have wasted all the money and stopped the investigations that are taking place, which are really important to the families. Every single investigation is important to every single family, because it's about the death of their loved one. And we will debate at, I'm sure, length in the House the specifics of the legislation. The state has a duty, of course, to properly investigate cases where the state has been involved in a death. The right honourable gentleman is well aware of that, and it's a duty that all of us should uphold.
Claire Hannah.
Firstly, can I thank the Minister and his team for their work on this package, including the member for Putney, who was so well regarded by everybody who came across her in Northern Ireland. Can I thank officials in the Department of Foreign Affairs in Dublin for the same, because that partnership is vital to moving forward. And the SDLP acknowledges the progress in this package if it is faithfully captured in the legislation. And when we push for more and better, please know that that comes from a sincere and long-held determination to get this right for families, for survivors and for our society as a whole. Despite some voices to the contrary, including recently, I don't believe that most people do believe that any murder in Northern Ireland was justified or inevitable or useful or worthy of cover-up, and perpetuating those narratives is an enormous challenge for the present and for the future as well. But does the Secretary of State agree with me that all of the work invested by families and campaigners and by his officials will be worth nothing if those who created victims, whether Republican or Loyalist paramilitaries or state forces who assisted them, do not approach this with full transparency and disclosure, and put honesty and the needs of victims over the needs of their own narratives?
Well, my honourable friend gives me the opportunity to pay tribute to my extraordinary officials, some of whom are here with us today, who have, it's been the privilege of my life to work with them on all of this. And I know that my honourable friend will hold us to the highest standards, and I accept what she says in the spirit in which it's offered. As I indicated to the House earlier, I want there to be the maximum provision of information to families, but we also have to acknowledge that all governments, any government, has responsibilities for the security of the state and to protect life, and this government will uphold both.
Dr Al Pinkerton.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome the Minister to his place, and can I also welcome my honourable friend to his new place, and to, frankly, the best job that somebody could have in opposition. I have spent the summer speaking to veterans groups who I've been speaking to about that vital commitment that they need to feel, that the process of prosecution does not become persecution. And whilst many of those veterans recognise that they went to Northern Ireland in order to restore the rule of law, and that they think that they should be subject to the laws of this land, they nonetheless remain incredibly anxious about the possibility that the process of persecution becomes persecution. Can I ask the Secretary of State, has he had the official backing of any veterans group for the approach that he has taken? And separately, can I also ask, has he had any assurances from the Republic of Ireland government that they will, as a result of the publication of this bill, drop the interstate case against the United Kingdom?
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and can I thank him for the role he played when he was leading for the Liberal Democrats on Northern Ireland. The truth is that with the passage of time, the possibility of prosecutions becomes increasingly remote. We all know that to be the case. Most of the families I have met, most, not all, have said, I know no one's going to be held to account through a judicial process, but I just want to know what happened. That's what I want. And it causes such pain and grief that answer cannot be provided. It really is difficult. And as far as the Irish government is concerned, I believe that they will honour the promises that they have made, because this is a significant moment, this partnership with the Irish government, because in moving from non-cooperation to cooperation, it will open up the possibility of more information coming to families. And look, on the interstate case, that is a matter for the Irish government, but I'm very clear of one thing. The last Legacy Act created circumstances in which the law that was passed was not compatible with our international obligations, and that is the basis of the interstate case. The legislation I'm bringing before the House will fix that, will deal with it. And in those circumstances, there is no basis, in my view, for the interstate case any longer.
Graham Downey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement today, and in particular for his focus on answers. And it is answers that people want. As someone who lost a friend in Tim Parry when he was murdered by IRA in 1993, I know exactly how important it is for families and everyone who knows victims to get the answers they deserve. And I think the agreement today really is vital in getting that process moving again to get victims and their families the answers that they deserve. Can I ask him to go into a little bit more detail about how he's going to continue that work with families and the victims as this process goes forward, both during the process of the legislation and afterwards, to make sure that answers remains at the absolute heart of what this government's trying to achieve?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for what he has just said. I spoke yesterday to the Victims Commissioner in Northern Ireland. On the day that the framework was published, on the 19th of September, the Taoiseach and I met the Victims and Survivors Forum in Northern Ireland, explained what the framework was seeking to do, and I made a commitment to the Victims Commissioner yesterday that I will come back to meet the Victims and Survivors Forum once they've had a chance to look at the legislation to find out what they think.
Simon Hall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the interest of trying to solve this issue, I wish the Secretary of State well and hope that he will bring forward the bill and deal with its progress in a spirit of compromise and cooperation between the parties to try to find the best landing spot possible. He mentioned earlier good faith, and that is a precious resource which is often very short in supply when it comes to this issue. Could he, because I think it would be helpful, work vigorously with the Irish government for them to work at speed and pace to ascertain what, if any, legislative measures they require to make good on what it is they have committed to, and as best as possible to work those two legislations in lockstep in order to give confidence to both sides who have concerns when it comes to good faith, or rather the absence of it.
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman for what he said, and I hope he will know that I will do anything and everything I can to try and find a way forward in partnership with as many members of the House as possible, because this question has for a long period of time been subject to the bipartisanship that is in the main characterised relations between the parties in the House on matters to do with Northern Ireland. I recognise that there are disagreements in relation to one aspect of what we are putting forward. Doesn't mean we can't work together on the others. I do take his point about the importance of seeing the legislation that is required in Ireland in order to give effect to this, and I was standing next to the Taoiseach when he made it quite clear, to give an example, that the commitment to enable witnesses to give evidence to the OMA public inquiry, he said we will legislate to deal with that so that it's in place before the hearings resume in March, and that seems to me to be a very important example of good faith.
Colm Eastwood.
I suppose the Secretary of State will forgive some of us for being cautious before we are ready to believe that the government will, and the state and any paramilitary organisation will give over the information that's required. In fact, right now, there are families across the road in the Supreme Court in legal dispute with the government because the government is withholding information from them. We know there's a pattern in this. When it comes to inquests, will he look again at the sifting process, and will he put family views, and will we give family views primacy when it comes to deciding which cases will have an inquest? And will he drop his proposal? Will he drop his proposal to give himself the power to appoint judges in that inquisitorial mechanism? Because a very important principle of the independence of the judiciary needs to be held up.
Well, on the subject of inquests, there will be 3 statutory tests that the Solicitor General will have to apply. And I've just indicated in answer to an earlier question what they are. Family views will be one of the considerations. But if inquests can't proceed because of sensitive information, well, wouldn't it be more sensible to put it into the Commission, which can deal with sensitive information because it has provision for closed hearings? No doubt my honourable friend will make the point about appointment processes when we come to discuss the bill. I would, however, just point out, and it's also relevant to the point that's been made from the opposition benches, the agreement on the information retrieval mechanism. This was something that the previous Conservative government negotiated with the Irish government and formed part of the Stormont House Agreement. What is the purpose of it? The purpose of it is to enable those who have information to pass it to the body, which can then pass it to the families, and that information will be a protected disclosure, which is not the same as immunity. It will be a protected disclosure. That system has worked very well in recovering quite a number of the remains of those who were abducted, tortured, murdered and buried by the IRA through the ICLVR, and I hope that that is a step forward in going back to what was agreed at Stormont House by the last government, and the Irish government and the political parties, well, not all of them, will be welcome on all sides.
Sarcher Eastwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Secretary of State, you refer to this as unfinished business, and in the last statement we heard about the successes of the peace process in Northern Ireland. I was 12 years old when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. I now stand here 40 years of age as the MP for Lagan Valley, and my constituents deserve truth and justice as much as anybody else. We've heard a lot today about veterans, and my family were part of that cohort, and they proudly served, along with many others. They do not want an amnesty. They do not want immunity. They do not want equivocation with terrorists, which was proposed by the outgoing government. We hear about people in Northern Ireland that were in the wrong place at the wrong time whenever they died. They were not. It was the terrorists that were in the wrong place, doing the wrong work. We must send out a clear signal, no matter what our political opinion, that terrorism was wrong in the past and it is wrong now. Can you give me your guarantee that you will discuss this with the Northern Ireland Executive and my ministerial colleagues to make sure that those families who so rightfully deserve truth and justice actually have the resource to be able to get it?
Well, may I say to the honourable member, I agree with every single word that she expressed so powerfully and so forcefully, and I would encourage those who've been chuntering from a sedentary position during the course of these exchanges to reflect on the point that you made about there are many people who say we don't want immunity. We don't want immunity, and we certainly object to it being given to those who committed the most appalling crimes. And voices in Northern Ireland really do need to be listened to, which is why it's the failure to do that, including in the last Legacy Act, why I made the point that there's a terrible lack of trust on the part of politicians over a long period of time. I'm not going to make a party point. There is a terrible lack of trust in politicians because they've seen attempts before and they haven't worked. We've got to try and make this work, and I've already begun the process of talking to her colleagues in the Northern Ireland Executive.
Joe White.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following my colleague's last question, I'd like to say that the Tories' immunity system would have meant immunity for the perpetrators of terrorist crimes across the UK. And our domestic courts have determined this. Does the Minister agree that this government has no choice but to rectify the situation?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend. She makes the point extremely forcefully. It didn't work. It was never deliverable. There never was immunity. It was a false promise made to veterans who were badly let down and badly served by the last government. And whoever won the election last year would have had to deal with this mess that we have inherited, and that is what we are seeking to do.
Sir David Davies.
In March of this year, it was widely reported the Secretary of State gave his word to Mairead Kelly, the sister of IRA murderer Patrick Kelly, that there would be an inquest on the Loughall incident. Is this remedial order a fulfilment of that promise? Because if so, it means 30 years on, the government is dragging veterans into court over an operation that stopped 8 heavily armed IRA murderers. Men who had already killed, men who were on their way to kill again, and with weapons that have been used in 40 previous murders. Let's be clear. By stopping this attack, those soldiers prevented the murder of many more innocent Northern Ireland citizens. So what justice is served by punishing those brave soldiers with a stressful and unnecessary process? The Liberal who spoke earlier described it as a persecution, punishing them for doing nothing more than their duty. Is this really what the Secretary of State intends?
The fact is that this government was elected on a commitment because there was a lot of opposition to the ending of inquests under the Legacy Act. There was, maybe not from him, but from a lot of other people in Northern Ireland. And the government came in committed to restore the inquests that had started and were stopped. And the reason that I said what I said is because Loughall, as I've already indicated to the Shadow Secretary of State, is one of those 9 cases. It is for the independent coronial system to take a decision about that. But one of the factors, of course, that coroners have to take into account is how they're going to deal with any sensitive information that is provided. And we know from other inquests that there have been a number of cases where the coroners said, well, I accept that if this information cannot see the light of day, they've examined the public interest immunity certificate and have reached the conclusion that I can't take the case any further. And in those circumstances, the sensible thing would be for cases to move into the Commission where sensitive information can be considered.
Lauren Sullivan.
Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Secretary of State's commitment to new protections for veterans. Will he update the House on the discussions he and the MOD ministers have had with veterans and their representative groups about these measures?
Well, we have had many such discussions. My honourable and gallant friend and myself and the Defence Secretary, and the measures that I have announced will be contained in this bill and the other non-legislative measures are the result of those discussions, because we've listened very carefully to the concerns that veterans have expressed, and we've come forward with what we think is a fair, reasonable, balanced package of measures that will provide protection while also taking forward the responsibility we have to enable those families to find answers, including Forces families.
Stuart Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm against the repealing of the Legacy Act, and I served in Northern Ireland, and I'm doing so in opposition now. I raised in government major concern and dishonour when none of the benches or the points the Minister has raised now didn't have the decency to come to this House and debate them. They let it go through, and it went on Hansard that actually very few people even bothered to come to the chamber to debate this when it was when we took it through government. But the 2 points I do have quickly are the support for veterans. You've spoken about the process they will have to go to. I want to know what support is available, as you have mentioned, and also fairer disclosure. When the terrorists didn't keep records, but the British Army did, how are you going to ensure fairer disclosure through that process?
Secretary of State, can I just remind members not to refer to you, as that means me. Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable member for his point. Well, there is support available for veterans through the Ministry of Defence, and I know that the Armed Forces Minister is very, very committed to making sure that veterans get all the support they need, which is in part reflected in the package that we have announced. On disclosure, we are making a number of changes, amending the definition of sensitive information so it's not designated by virtue of the body that held it. And that's one of the reasons why the courts found the disclosure arrangements were not compatible with our commitments. The Secretary of State will have to conduct a balancing exercise on what should be disclosed. The Secretary of State will be required to give reasons for any decision not to disclose, to the extent that that doesn't risk harm to national security. And of course, any decision that the Secretary of State makes can be subject to judicial review.
Lewis Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and also for the way which he and the Minister for Armed Forces have engaged on this matter in recent months. I have many constituent veterans in Sunderland Central who served with distinction in Operation Banner, and he rightly praises the professionalism and service of our armed forces in that. And I welcome, therefore, the protections he sets out today. Can I push him a little bit more on the continuing work with veterans groups, so that as these protections are being implemented, there will be a process of ongoing review to ensure that they provide effective protection from vexatious lawfare?
Well, I'm very happy to give my honourable friend that assurance, because we've made these commitments because we want them to work, and the government is determined to ensure that that is the case.
Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And just to follow on from that assurance from the Secretary of State about those protections for veterans, because on the 19th of September he stood beside the Irish Government when he made this announcement. Later that evening, the Taoiseach Simon Harris went on Irish media and clearly said that there was no added protections for veterans in the legacy deal. So can the Secretary of State give assurance to this House, is there protections for veterans in this legacy deal or not?
When the honourable gentleman sees the legislation, he will see those protections he will see that the protections that we have said will be backed by legislation are in the legislation. But in addition to that, the provision relating to cold calling and not requiring veterans to rehearse the historical context when it is possible for someone from the Ministry of Defence, for example, to do that, to assist both inquests and the Commission.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Secretary of State knows, I'm a member of the Human Rights Committee, and we've been very engaged in this issue, not least because of our court's ruling the previous government's attempt to legislate on this issue was unlawful, because it potentially would grant immunity, amongst others, to terrorists. That is no way to serve justice to families and victims. It's no way to serve justice to our veterans. So can the Secretary of State commit that the legislation that we are bringing forward will not grant immunity to terrorists? That's a simple request. It's remarkable that I have to ask it, but given the legislation that the previous government attempted to pass, I think it is important